I used to be his little shadow, always one step behind him, clutching his hand like it was the only thread holding me to the world. After Mom died, it kind of was. I poured every ounce of love I had into that bond. We made birthdays out of Tuesdays, turned quiet dinners into inside joke marathons. He wasn't just my dad. He was my safe place, my constant. But even back then, a small voice inside me whispered fears I didn't want to hear. What if someone else took my place? What if he needed someone more? Then she came along. At first, I wanted to like her. For him, you know? She smiled too much, said all the right things, acted like she had read the script to our lives and memorized every line. But there was something off. Something that made my skin itch even when she was being nice. Slowly things changed. My phone calls started going unanswered. Family dinners got rescheduled. He'd say he was tired or that plans came up. But I saw it in his eyes, the distance, like he was watching me through glass. The walls closed in quietly, like fog. One day I woke up and realized I didn't belong in my own home anymore. She was everywhere, in his routines, his calendar, even his words. Things he never would have said before suddenly came from his mouth, cold and rehearsed. I wasn't losing him. I had already lost him. She didn't just want space in his life. She wanted mine erased from it. And piece by piece, she got what she wanted. And then he died, just like that. No warning, no goodbye. The grief hadn't even settled when I heard the real gut punch. The will. Everything, every cent, every memory, every brick of the house I grew up in, left to her. Nothing for me. Not even a note. When I confronted her, shaking, she just looked at me and said, "You were just a shadow of his past. I was his future. He didn't need reminders like you." If she wanted to rewrite the story, I'll show her what happens when the author fights back. You think you're prepared for loss when you've already lived through it once. I thought nothing could hurt more than losing Mom, watching her fade away while pretending to be strong. But this was different. This was betrayal dressed up in pearls and polite smiles. Grief is heavy, but betrayal burns. It keeps you up at night, replaying every memory, wondering which ones were real and which were rewritten while you weren't looking. After the funeral, I walked through the house like a ghost. Her perfume lingered in every room, as if she'd claimed not just the space but the air itself. My photos were gone. My mother's favorite vase? Replaced. Even the old rug with the tiny coffee stain from when I was 8 vanished. Like someone had scrubbed me out of history with bleach and denial. And my father, the man who once promised I'd never be alone? He wasn't there to explain why he'd left me this way. People told me to move on, to accept it. These things happen, they said, like love could just be overwritten with legal paperwork. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. She hadn't just taken his money. She'd stolen our story. She'd twisted the ending and dared to call it justice. And somewhere deep down, beneath the ache and the anger, something started to grow. Not hatred. Not exactly. Something colder. Sharper. The truth is, I could have let it go. I could have walked away, started over, lived a quieter life far from her shadow. But when someone erases your name from your own family, they don't just steal your inheritance. They steal your identity. And if you've never felt that before, let me tell you, it changes you. It makes you pick up every broken shard of yourself and start plotting how to cut your way back in. The day after the will was read, I sat in my car outside the house for over an hour. Just parked there, watching the curtains move like she was peeking out, making sure I stayed on the outside where I apparently belonged. I thought about ringing the doorbell, about screaming, about throwing a rock straight through that picture-perfect window. But I didn't. I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel like it might hold me together. That house had held every birthday, every scar, every whispered "I love you," and now it wasn't mine. What stung the most wasn't the money. It wasn't the house. It was the silence. My father died, and his final words to me were, nothing. No letter, no voicemail, no whisper of comfort from beyond the grave, just signatures on legal documents that erased me like a typo. But I knew my father. At least I thought I did. And something about it didn't sit right. He would never do that. Not unless someone had convinced him he should. I started going over everything in my head, the sudden distance, the changed routines, the way he flinched when I asked if he was happy. And I realized something. Maybe this wasn't just grief. Maybe it was something darker. Maybe she didn't just wedge herself between us. Maybe she built a whole new reality and forced him to live in it. And if that's true, if she twisted him into leaving me with nothing but questions, then I have to find the answers. For him. For me. She might think the story's over, that she got the last word. But here's the thing. Stories don't end when the ink dries. They end when the truth is told. And I'm just getting started. At first, I was broken, not the kind of broken people see. Not the crying in public, can't get out of bed kind. No, mine was quieter, colder. I moved through the days like I was underwater, nodding at sympathy, swallowing my rage. People think betrayal burns hot, but it doesn't. It freezes you. I felt like I was watching my own life from behind glass, waiting for something, anything, to make it make sense. And then one night, sitting alone with the paperwork, I found something that didn't add up. It was a transfer, just a line on a bank statement, but it didn't belong. A large sum moved from one account to another, just weeks before he died. I almost missed it. Almost. But once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. And suddenly the silence that haunted me wasn't empty. It was suspicious. That's when the fog started to clear. The grief didn't go away, but it made room for something else. Questions. And I wasn't just mourning anymore. I was hunting. She thought I was the kind of woman who would collapse under the weight of it all. And maybe I would have been, if I hadn't inherited my mother's backbone. Or if I didn't have the kind of education that taught me how to spot red flags dressed as paperwork. I knew contracts. I understood intent. And I had connections. Not loud ones, not flashy. Just people who owed favors. People who trusted me. People who remembered who I was before she started rewriting me. So I started digging. Quietly. Carefully. While she played the grieving widow, I became the shadow in the archives. The echo in the courthouse. The whisper that made accountants stutter when they saw my name on the caller ID. I didn't come in with anger. I came in with questions. And questions, when asked the right way, can tear a lie apart from the inside out. What I found wasn't just a fluke. One discrepancy led to another, like pulling a loose thread from a tapestry and watching the whole image unravel. There were documents with forged signatures, meetings that didn't happen, witnesses who changed their stories when I pressed. The will had been amended weeks before his death, oddly timed, suspiciously neat. I remembered how frail he looked that last month, how disoriented. He wouldn't have had the strength to sign a dinner receipt, let alone a legal overhaul. Someone helped him, or more likely helped themselves. Every page I uncovered felt like a conversation with the past. I could hear his voice again, in small details. The way he never would have closed that account, how he always insisted on handwritten notes for anything sentimental. And that's when it hit me. Maybe she didn't just twist his heart. Maybe she'd bent the law too. That wasn't just betrayal, that was theft. Of identity, of truth, of love disguised as control. And suddenly my grief had a direction. But this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice, the kind that doesn't come from courtrooms or headlines, the kind that lives in the silence after the truth is spoken aloud. So while she smiled at country club luncheons and gave sad little interviews about her late husband's legacy, I built something else. A case, a timeline, a quiet fire under her feet, and every time I felt the weight of it pressing down on me, I drove to Mom's grave. I brought clippings from the investigation, sat on the cool earth, and told her everything. That's where I started the garden. I planted the first rose, deep red, just like the ones she used to grow, and promised I wouldn't stop until the story was mine again. That rose garden became my anchor. Each bloom was a vow, one for every lie uncovered, every truth reclaimed. I dug with my bare hands sometimes, fingernails filled with dirt, heart filled with purpose. It wasn't about flowers. It was about memory, about reclaiming space in a world that had tried to write me out. My mother had always said, "What we plant in pain, we harvest in strength." And I was starting to believe her. The deeper I went into my father's records, the clearer it became. She hadn't just manipulated his heart, she'd manipulated his legacy. I found emails that had been deleted, but not fully erased, voice memos he'd recorded when he felt confused, things he never shared, but had tried to process. And in between the lines, I heard a man trying to hold on to a life that was slipping through his fingers. He was scared, he was lost, and no one had protected him, not even me. But that guilt, I channeled it. I turned it into fuel. I started sketching out the bigger picture. The players involved, the pressure points, the places where her carefully crafted facade could crack. And the more I learned, the more I realized. She'd built her throne on a foundation of rot. All I had to do was shine a light under it, and the whole thing would collapse. She took the fortune. I'll take the truth, and I'll make the world watch. She used to call me a burden. Never to my face, of course. Not in those exact words. But I heard it in her tone when I walked into a room, in the way her smile tightened when I spoke about my father. I was the inconvenient reminder, the piece that didn't fit her polished puzzle. So when I started the foundation in his name, I chose that word, burden, like a challenge. Let them all see what a burden can become when you stop apologizing for existing. I didn't launch it for her. I launched it for him. For the version of my father that the world had forgotten, the one who mentored young entrepreneurs, who helped families keep their homes during rough seasons, who never once let me down, until she got to him. I built the foundation to reflect his values, not hers. Not the woman who threw gala dinners while quietly cutting ties with every part of his past that didn't serve her image. No, this was mine, and it was real. I started collecting stories, quiet ones, from people who thought they'd been forgotten. A gardener he paid through the winter, a former assistant he sent to law school, an old friend whose cancer treatments he covered without ever asking for thanks. One by one, they came to me. Letters, emails, tearful phone calls from strangers who remembered the man behind the money, and every word they shared felt like stitching a torn page back into our story. I hired a team, not big, just smart. People who believed in impact over headlines. We worked out of a small office above a bakery, the air always smelling like cinnamon and something warm. And from there, I rebuilt what she tried to bury. Quietly, steadily. The narrative was shifting. I could feel it. But I wasn't done, not even close. The beauty of truth is that it doesn't need to scream. It just needs room to breathe. I didn't come out swinging. I didn't accuse or point fingers. I let the stories speak. I reached out to journalists, the quiet, thoughtful kind, and fed them pieces of the puzzle. Interviews with people who had been helped, documents that painted a fuller picture of my father's intentions, glimpses into who he really was before she rewrote him into a brand. And slowly, the whispers began. Articles started surfacing. Not scandals, not yet, but profiles. Headlines like, "Remembering the Real Father's Name," and "Legacy Beyond the Ledger." Her photo never appeared, but the subtext was loud enough for anyone in her circle to hear. Business partners began pulling back. Invitations she once flaunted stopped arriving. Charities she once courted started returning her checks. Her perfectly curated image was beginning to fracture, not with a bang, but with the slow, relentless pressure of truth. And the best part? I never said her name. Not once. That was the elegance of it. She couldn't accuse me of defamation because I wasn't attacking her. I was simply honoring my father, reclaiming his name in the public eye, bit by bit. I turned the narrative into a mirror and let her see herself in its reflection without ever having to lift my voice. People began to ask about me, not out of pity, but curiosity. Who's behind the foundation? Why now? Why her? And just like that, the girl who was erased became someone to notice. The burden became the builder. But I wasn't seeking fame. I was preparing for something bigger, something she wouldn't see coming. The more momentum I gained, the quieter she became. That's how I knew it was working. She'd always been loud in her control, the kind of woman who managed people with charm dipped in venom. But now, nothing. No press releases, no charity appearances, no forced smiles at society events. Just silence. The kind that makes people wonder if there's something to hide. And in that silence, I planted my next move. I announced it softly at first. A gala in my father's honor. The Legacy Gala, I called it. Elegant, timeless. Invitations went out to everyone who had known him in his early days. Old colleagues, quiet friends, even people he hadn't seen in years but had impacted in ways he probably never realized. The guest list wasn't just strategic, it was sacred. Every name was a thread in the real story of who he was, the one she had tried to bury beneath gold-trimmed lies. And yes, she received one. Hand-delivered, sealed in ivory, addressed formally. Mrs. Stepmother's full name. I wanted her there. Needed her to see it unfold with her own eyes. She'd expect a tribute, one she assumed would polish her own image in the reflection of his name. But what she didn't know was that every speech, every detail, every light in that room had been carefully chosen to tell my story. Our story, the one that began long before she arrived. As the RSVPs rolled in and the date crept closer, I felt it. The shift. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I was leading. And the woman who tried to erase me was about to sit front row to a legacy she couldn't rewrite. The night of the gala felt like standing at the edge of a storm I had built with my own hands. I arrived early, walking the perimeter of the ballroom like I was tracing a battlefield. Every detail had a pulse. The music, the framed photographs, the candlelight flickering against gold-lined programs. This wasn't just an event. It was a reclamation. I wanted people to walk in expecting a tribute and leave carrying a truth they couldn't unsee. She arrived just after 8, dressed in black, of course. Her signature move, Eternal Widow. Her heels clicked against the marble like punctuation marks on a speech she thought she was giving. She smiled as she made her entrance, gracious and composed, assuming the spotlight would bend toward her like it always did. But this time, the room didn't tilt in her favor. It held its breath instead. People watched, yes, but not with admiration, with curiosity, with caution. I stood back and watched the currents shift. Old friends of my father pulled away mid-conversation. Some didn't even greet her. A few glanced at her, then looked at me, eyes wide, like they were finally seeing what had been hidden. The buzz in the room wasn't about her elegance or her tragedy. It was about the quiet, steady unraveling happening around her. And she didn't know it yet, but she was walking straight into the story she tried to burn. When I finally stepped onto the stage, the room hushed. Not in a performative way, in that full-body, bone-deep silence when people sense something important is about to be said. I looked out and saw faces I hadn't seen in years. People who once sent condolences, now sending strength. My hands didn't shake, my voice didn't crack. I spoke the way he once told me to, slowly, with conviction, like every word was a thread sewing something back together. I told stories, not about balance sheets or estate planning, but about rainy Sunday mornings with jazz in the background, his terrible attempts at pancakes, the way he used to squeeze my shoulder when he thought words wouldn't be enough. I spoke of values, of integrity, of the quiet kind of generosity that doesn't make headlines, but changes lives. And every sentence I chose was deliberate. A light pointed directly at the version of him she had tried to dim. People listened. Really listened. I could see them shifting in their chairs, remembering pieces of him they'd forgotten. A man who built more than wealth, he built people. And then I paused, just long enough for the air to feel heavier. I looked out across the room and said, "He once told me, never let the loudest voice tell your story." My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Tonight, I take my voice back. And then, the final moment. The one I had held closest, guarded like a secret treasure. A screen lit up behind me, and there he was, my father. Candid footage, grainy and imperfect. Sitting at his desk, talking into a camera, unaware anyone would ever see it. His words were simple. "Whatever happens, I hope she knows she's always been my legacy." That was it. No legal jargon, no loopholes. Just a father, stripped of pretense, anchoring me to the truth. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. The applause erupted on its own, warm and thunderous, not for the foundation or the gala, but for the restoration of a name. Mine, his, ours. And somewhere in that noise, I knew she was shrinking. Not because I humiliated her, but because I had taken everything she feared most: control, attention, meaning, and I did it without ever touching her crown. As the room stood and clapped, I felt something shift inside me. Not triumph, not vengeance, but release. Like I had been carrying this weight for so long, I forgot how it felt to just stand tall. Faces blurred through tears I hadn't meant to cry. Hands found mine. Some were from strangers, others from people I once called family. For the first time in years, I wasn't the forgotten daughter in the corner. I was the story they would carry home with them. She left before dessert. Slipped out the side like a shadow, head high but eyes lowered. No one followed. No one called after her. And the silence she used to weaponize was finally turned against her. She looked smaller somehow, not because I had destroyed her, but because I had built something she could never control. I didn't have to bury her. I simply outlived the lie. The rest of the night unfolded like a memory I knew I'd return to for years. Toasts were made. Old voices shared warm, broken laughs. People passed around photos and names like heirlooms. And somewhere in the middle of it, someone whispered to me, he'd be proud. And I believed it. For the first time, I really believed it. Not because I'd won, but because I had spoken, and the world had listened. Later, as the last guests trickled out and the ballroom emptied, I stood alone in the quiet. The screen still lit, my father's frozen image smiling softly behind me. I looked into the cameras, not for her, not even for him, but for every daughter who'd ever been erased. She tried to erase me, but I became the ink. I didn't sue for the money. That's what made them nervous. If it had been about cash, it would have been easier to dismiss me as bitter or greedy. But when the papers hit the court, the headline wasn't about inheritance. It was about manipulation, coercion, and a dying man's final wishes being rewritten behind closed doors. I wasn't after the house or the jewelry or the art. I wanted the truth, in ink, on record, for anyone who might ever find themselves erased like I was. The trial wasn't dramatic, not in the way she probably feared. It was meticulous, clean, surgical. My legal team laid out the timeline, the inconsistencies, the sudden changes to his will, the medications that clouded his judgment. And I watched her squirm under oath, trying to spin control into care, trying to disguise domination as devotion. But this time, no one was buying it. The courtroom didn't need fire. It just needed light. When the ruling came, I felt nothing at first. Not joy, not even relief, just a quiet stillness. The judge awarded me symbolic damages, a dollar figure so small it wouldn't pay for a handbag she once flaunted. But that wasn't the point. The point was, someone believed me, legally, publicly, permanently. The record was no longer hers to shape. It belonged to the truth now. And that was worth more than anything she'd fought to keep. The next morning, I went straight to the grave. I wore jeans and no makeup, carried coffee and court transcripts. I sat cross-legged in the grass, laid the papers beside the roses, and whispered, "We did it." The wind was warm, and for the first time since he died, the silence felt different. It didn't ache. It answered. I didn't keep a cent. Every symbolic dollar from the case went straight into something I wish had existed when I was younger. A fund for women silenced by the same systems that failed me. I named it after my mother. Not just because she was strong, but because she taught me that being silenced is not the same as being wrong. The foundation isn't flashy. There are no marble plaques, no galas, no velvet ropes. Just real help. Quiet help. The kind that catches you before you fall all the way down. Her world fell apart the way sand slips through fingers, slowly, then all at once. Her name faded from society pages. Her invitations stopped arriving. Rumors swirled about creditors, about charities pulling out, about a house too big for one person to manage. But I never celebrated her downfall. That wasn't the point. Her silence was its own punishment. You can't starve someone who only ever fed off applause once the clapping has stopped. And me? I kept building. I wrote. I spoke. I gave interviews that weren't about scandal but survival. People leaned in, not because I was angry, but because I had something to say. And I said it all, with clarity, with purpose, without needing to name the villain in every paragraph. That's the thing about truth. Once it's free, it does the work on its own. You just have to stop apologizing for letting it live. I visited the rose garden often. Seasons came and went. The flowers bloomed taller every year, like they knew they were being seen now. And each time I left, I felt a little less like the girl who'd been erased, and more like the woman who rewrote the ending. Not out of spite, but out of love. The house is still standing. Her house, technically. But no one visits now. No cars in the driveway, no laughter echoing from the porch. Just long, empty windows and silence thick enough to hear your own regrets. I've driven past it a few times, not out of malice, just curiosity. It looks smaller now, like it knows the story it tried to hold no longer belongs there. Funny how a place can have everything, chandeliers, crown moldings, curated art, and still feel hollow. My life doesn't glitter, but it shines. I've built something honest, something real. The foundation has grown. The garden blooms without fail. And sometimes I get letters, handwritten ones, from women who say they finally feel seen. They don't quote my speeches. They quote my silence, my decisions. The way I didn't beg to be remembered. I just refused to be forgotten. And that, they tell me, is what gave them strength. I published the memoir because the truth deserves to have a spine. Not to sell copies, not to stir controversy, but to mark the story with my name. My real name. The one that was once left off a will, but now lives in the pages of something no one can erase. I dedicated it to my parents, both of them. Because even in the mess of manipulation and grief, I know my father loved me. And that love, however buried, is what lit the path back to myself. There's a plaque now, nestled in the soil beside my mother's favorite rose bush. It's simple, just a line of words carved into bronze. In memory of the women they tried to silence, and the daughters who spoke anyway. I stop there often, not to mourn, but to remind myself she inherited the house. I inherited the name. And that is what history remembers.